All right, welcome to another live episode of GeekOutdoors.com. As always, every week, I've got some very interesting news. And this week, I'm going to be covering, as usual, three things. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about is no headphone jacks, as you probably saw by the title or the screenshot. Secondly, we will be discussing Apple's most recent earnings, and that is always a big thing in the tech community. And finally, I'm going to be talking about a really unexpected arrest for the whole WannaCry ransomware that we actually had a few months ago. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the actual no headphone jack. So the reason why I kind of thought about this and why this came up is because recently we have actually had some newer renders of the upcoming Google Pixel 2 phone. And for all of us who are familiar with the whole Google Pixel, this was based upon the Google Nexus program. And so this was kind of like Google's way of saying, hey, this is how you can build a Google phone. And we have partners or manufacturers that would create these Nexus phones. And it started with HTC. HTC actually produced the very first Nexus phone. And then Samsung produced a Nexus phone. And then other companies like LG and even Huawei as well. But really, the whole point of this, in my opinion, was it was a way for Google to really test out whether or not a quote-unquote Google phone would make sense and whether or not there would be a market for it. And since they're using other manufacturers to actually create the phones, it would be less investment to them. And at the same time, if the phones became successful, obviously they could crank out more phones. And so, in my opinion, it was a way to test market this idea, because obviously the company that everybody wants to model when it comes to the smartphone world, and in a lot of ways a technology company a lot of companies want to be like, is Apple, because they have created a system that is highly profitable and their brand is extremely strong. And so you could see the transition of first, hey, let's go ahead and create these Nexus phones that's kind of like a showcase for what Android should be, and at the same time your hardware partners are benefiting from it now towards what they really want. In the end, I think Google really wants to control everything, just like Apple does, vertically. Okay, and so as they are increasing the Pixel brand, as they are releasing more versions, I mean, they are still being produced by other manufacturers. The Pixel phones are underneath, but now they don't have the other manufacturers' branding. And so eventually, what is going to happen with this is they're probably definitely going to have their own manufacturing as well. Okay, so where you will definitely not know who is partnering up to actually manufacture this phone. But the reason why this came up, as I stated earlier, is because on one of the renders, the newest renders, it looks like the most recent upcoming Google Pixel phone would not have a headphone jack. And man, that's just kind of suck. I mean, for people who really enjoy having a pure Google experience, and also having the quote-unquote latest and greatest, at least at that time, but it's not going to have a headphone jack. And as everybody knows, Apple was really the one who, I would say, popularized the whole idea of not having a headphone jack. And hey, good morning, Lance. Hey, what's up, Lance? Thanks for joining. And you know, with Apple, as we normally know, especially people in the geek community, Apple is usually not the first to do anything, okay? Because other companies have already tried it first. But Apple is usually the one who takes it and then makes it popular, because obviously Apple is a huge brand. Hey, good morning, Taha Gemini. Hi there, good afternoon. Oh, it's afternoon in Europe? Awesome. All right, thanks for joining, y'all. And just to really quickly catch y'all up, just coming in, I'm just talking about the Google Pixel 2 phone renders and also not having a headphone jack. And so, as I was saying a little bit earlier, Apple is usually not the first to introduce new technologies or even new services. But because of their brand presence, because they are a company with so much, I would say, with so much weight and influence, that whenever Apple does something, even if it's been done before, a lot of people take note, not only in the tech community, but also mass consumers as well. And so the no headphone jack thing, Apple wasn't the first manufacturer to produce a phone that did not have a headphone jack. And if anything, at least here in the United States, Motorola was the very first company to introduce a phone, if I remember correctly, that did not have a headphone jack. At the time, I think it was their Motorola Z, their top-end phone that did not have a headphone jack. And then other companies follow suit, specifically companies out of China. And it looks like now with the Google Pixel not offering a headphone jack, the upcoming one, it looks like other companies, big companies, will definitely go the same way. And I think Samsung will be a big one. If they start introducing their next Galaxy lines without a headphone jack, then everybody's going to follow them as well. Because in the whole Android world, I really see Samsung as the Apple of the Android world. Okay, when they do something, other companies follow in mass. Okay, and so not having a headphone jack, I definitely think there's a debate between the two. You know, the first case is that, and I'm in this camp, like, why are you getting rid of the headphone jack? Okay, I mean, there's still a lot of devices that use the headphone jack. There's still a lot of people who are still buying buying devices that require a headphone jack, okay, or that have that option. And even such simple things, besides your actual phones, receivers, MP3 players, a lot of your Roku or your TV devices that you're watching, you could stick the headphone jack into the remote so you could have like private listening. I mean, just bottom line, headphone jacks still are used in a lot of different devices, and so my argument is we should still have headphone jacks. Okay, I mean, in one case, the first thing is because it's still being used in a lot of different devices. Secondly is the whole thought of quality. Okay, because if you are an audiophile, and if you're not familiar with what an audiophile is somebody who's really into audio. They most times have very high-end equipment, so that's an audiophile. And for an audiophile, I don't think there is many audiophiles that would prefer having a wireless connection for their headphone devices versus having it wired, because you're going to get the best quality, you're not going to have any latency, and it's going to be a direct connection, so you don't have to worry about those things. But most importantly is the quality that you're going to get out of it if you are an audiophile. But just for normal everyday users, it's just the practicality of it all. We have already devices with headphone that require a headphone jack, and that if now you're introducing devices that would not work without these other new devices that have a wireless only, then all of your other devices are pretty much useless unless you buy some type of crazy adapter. But even then, like you've seen these dongles for the Apple iPhone where you stick a dongle into your one port and here's your headphone jack. The same thing with the Motorola as well. It's just, you're living in a world of dongles, so I'm really heavily against not having a headphone jack. I'm really heavy against still having a headphone jack, and that manufacturers should slow down on it. And so the other camp, the other side is saying, you know what, technology is moving forward, stop living in the Stone Ages. Okay, so but that's why I put that argument at the beginning. A lot of people are still using it. A lot of devices are still using it. Now, I completely agree that technology is continually going to move forward. Otherwise, we wouldn't have computers. Our computers would still be the size of rooms, because that's how computers were built. If technology didn't move forward, we would still be using VCRs, or even rotary phones, or even CRT monitors, or even still using modems, So I understand the point that technology has to move forward, but I really think that in order for technology to move forward, there's also a thing called timing. Okay, now, in a sense of when VHS tapes got pretty much removed by DVD players, it made sense at that point, because there were still, by the time VHS tapes has been around a long time, and DVDs was slowly coming into the mix. They didn't like stop completely selling VHS tapes. Whereas in this model, it's like, oh, well, people are still using it, but we're going to go ahead and remove this feature from devices that are used by millions of people. Okay, that's like really quick. And Apple did something similar with the CD drives, DVD drives as well, with the optical drives. So that's my counter argument to it. A lot of people say, technology should move forward. I definitely agree with that, but it should move forward in a way that it makes sense in terms of timing. And I understand you want to get technology in the hands of new technology, so then manufacturers will produce these new devices, okay? But at this point, the way they're doing this, I don't think it's really working out well for a lot of people, once again, because so many people are still using it, and it's expensive. Just think about it. Just think about if you had all these audio equipment, which a lot of people do, that all have headphone jacks, so now they're either going to have to buy brand new wireless headphones or get dongles, you know? So the accessory manufacturers are going to make more money, and the companies behind them who have licensing fees like Apple, they're going to make more money as well. And so, you know, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me, but it does. And I definitely would say, like, slow down, you know. I mean, for any other phone manufacturers going to release devices, because our smartphones are the main devices that actually use the headphone jack, okay? They replace our MP3 players, which people used to have separate audio players. So let me answer some questions real quick. So Lance is saying, time to go and buy an MP3 again, LOL. I want the headphone jack. Yeah, Lance, exactly. I'll go buy an MP3 player if I have to. Now, how we're saying, if Apple would use USB-C and the rest has it as well, we still have one port for sound. Yeah, you know, that's, it's like, yeah, that's a perfect example. And, you know, like, for example, with the Apple iPhone, right? And people have mentioned this before. Whenever the iPhone, I think iPhone 7 was released without a headphone jack, it's like, no problem. You just use a dongle. You just use that same port, right? Well, there's the functionality. You can't charge your phone while you're using this port to put your headphone jack in. I mean, just something like that alone, practically, it makes absolutely no sense. I mean, have you seen people carry around their Apple iPhone with all these dongles and stuff, and then you can't charge? It's like, it's a mess. Okay, and at the same time, the Apple iPhone still doesn't have wireless charging. And so there's the whole practical elements of it. And here, this is a case where these manufacturers, I mean, they are definitely not dumb, okay? These companies knew that this was coming. They knew that these trends were coming. They have R&D departments, so they have a lot more data on things than you do. And so they're actually doing this not just out of just coming up with it. This is actually planned. This is where the industry is heading. I get that. But like practicality-wise, have you seen people, mostly with Apple devices, that have so many adapters and dongles? It's like something that used to be normal is now a feature, right? Before, you know, like headphone jacks, right? Or USB ports. Now they're going to become a feature. So now they could actually tout this as a feature for your phone. And that's like, I get it. It's marketing. It's a way for them to sell you more products, but it's absolutely stupid. You know, why is my headphone jack now a feature of a phone? I mean, I want real new features, you know, and this is where I think the industry, I think mostly with the smartphone industry, but also like the computing industry. And I gotta put Apple in here, because like, if everybody's following Apple in this model where, and I get it, they are very profitable, but if you're getting more and more to the area where it's not practical, where I now have to have a dongle just to use my USB port and my USB devices, or have another adapter just to use my headphones, and it looks crazy. If you see people carry this around, not only you have to carry accessory, but it looks stupid. You have these long dongles. Or have you seen the laptops, the new MacBook Pros, where you don't have a normal USB port, right? Now you have to have all these dongles. It looks like a monster, you know, whereas before, you have a USB port, you just stick it in. Or like before, you have a headphone jack, you just stick it in. I mean, practically, it doesn't make any sense, okay? And another thing I want to talk about wireless technologies, okay? This is something that has always concerned me, and it's related to the headphone jack. So, obviously, if you have a wireless headphone jack, right? You're going to have to send stuff over the air wirelessly, okay? So, in one case, you could think about, okay, the quality could definitely be degraded by the time it gets to the device, okay? Whether it's Bluetooth, whether it's Wi-Fi connect, it doesn't matter. But the second more important thing that I'm worried about is security, okay? We all know that data is going around us all the time. We just can't see them. And security has always been an issue, and it's becoming more of an issue as well. And we've seen it on at least the media outlets. We know companies get hacked all the time. Encryption routines are getting decrypted in so many different places. And so now, if more and more of your wireless services are I mean, more of your services are actually wireless, guess what? That's more of an opportunity for these companies to, or not companies, I would say, just for people who actually want to steal this data, that's more available for them. And so that's another reason why I like against having wireless headphones at this point, you know, or even just giving you the option of having it wired as well, because as more and more of our data is over the air, it's a security risk, okay? And unfortunately, it's not stopping. We're gonna have more and more stuff that's wireless. Just think about your mouse. I had to go buy a new mouse the other day, and I went to Best Buy and I couldn't find any mouse that were not wireless, you know, and you know that required me to get a wireless mouse and also batteries and stuff for it as well. And you know, once again, it's sending you know, these signals across wirelessly, and I would rather still have that wired option if possible. So let me see real quick. So hey Gaza, what's going on? All right. So Lance says Apple uses an ecosystem business model. If you buy our phone, you must buy a crate full of bits to be able to use it. Yes, Lance. And actually, Lance, I do want to get into the whole ecosystem, because when I get to my Apple earnings, which, well, let's go ahead and talk about it, because I kind of think I beat that to death. So for the headphone jacks, not having a headphone jack, looks like the Google Pixel 2 is not going to have it based upon the renders. And myself, I am purely against building smartphones, at least this time, without a headphone jack. I want a headphone jack for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, and also the whole idea of security and also cost to the consumer, and also, like, you know, inconvenience. It's not very practical. So those are my reasons why I don't, you know, want them to get rid of the headphone jack. So let's move on to the Apple earnings, and this is a great time to talk about ecosystems. And so Apple just reported their latest quarterly earnings, and as usual, they're destroying it. I mean, I think they reported like almost $50 billion last quarter. Let me see. Wow, it's a lot. So third quarter revenue was 45.4 billion, and they're expected to earn 49 billion in the fourth quarter. So Apple's making a ton of money. I mean, man, yeah, so for iPhone sales, they're up by 1% year over year. iPad up 14% year over year. That's surprising. Their Mac sales is flat year over year. It's 4.2 million units. Wow, I'm really surprised by the iPad sales, because sales of tablet, even for Apple, have been going down year over year. And you know, Apple saw this, and so if you remember, they released the iPad Pro lines about a year ago, and so they knew this was coming, and it's actually helping them. I'm really surprised. Now, the one thing that I really want to focus on here is their iPhone sales, okay? Because most of us know that the Apple iPhone, is the largest generator of revenue for Apple, and I think this year, this quarter actually, the Apple iPhone only accounted for, let me see, like 55%, I think. Let me make sure. Yeah, let me see, 55. Well, I'll read through this, but I remember reading that at least this last quarterly earnings, the Apple iPhone only accounted for like 55% of their total earnings, versus 70% the prior year. And so the Apple iPhone has always been a huge cash cow for Apple, but at the same time, it's also been a risk, because if their Apple iPhones tank, you know, because of competition, or because the people have just moved on to something else like Samsung devices, then they would be in trouble. I mean, but Apple is nowhere near being broke. You know, they have over $260 billion in cash. But I'm thinking about the long term. And Apple knew all of this was going to happen. Obviously, they have the numbers to see it. And so what they started doing was, they started focusing more on their services, okay? Their Apple iCloud, iTunes, you know, just other things outside of the Apple iPhone. And this gets into the whole ecosystem, right? And I've talked about this a lot before, okay? And for the whole business model of these technology companies. whether that would be Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Amazon, it doesn't matter. The money that they make is not really due to what they're selling you up front. You know, for example, when they're selling you the phone up front, of course they make a profit, but that's not really where their money is made. Their money is made in the ecosystem that they bring you in, you know, with all the products and other services that they're offering you, especially if it's a reoccurring model. For example, for Microsoft, right? Say, for example, you're using Microsoft Office. Well, when you purchase Microsoft Office, in this case, you can't purchase it, but before, you would purchase the Microsoft product, but then you would pay ongoing licensing fees, okay, or fees for you to get updates, you know, similar to what antivirus software companies do. That's one way that companies can continually make money for the long term. And now a lot of companies are going towards the monthly or annual pay model where you can't even buy the products up front. So Microsoft Office is one, and then also Adobe products as well. So all of these companies want to keep you in their ecosystem, okay? So then they could make continual money out of them, and that they could also sell you more products related to their services, okay? So like, for example, Apple does something extremely smart. When you are inside their ecosystem, they keep you in their ecosystem, you know, because Apple services, okay, let's not talk about products, because products, physical products, that's just a way for them to sell you into their services. Video game manufacturers do the same thing. Okay, so whenever Apple gets into their ecosystem, they do not share their ecosystem with other services. Really, they don't. You know, like a lot of times, in order for you to use Apple services, you have to be in the Apple ecosystem. Okay, like for example, you can't use Apple iMessages outside of the Apple ecosystem, right? Whereas something like Google services, you can use it on any platform, including Linux. You know, same thing with Microsoft. Microsoft right now, they keep their Office products, not so much as Apple, but right now I can't use, I'm sorry, not Office, Adobe. I'm sorry, I meant to say Adobe. So right now Adobe is not available on the Linux platform, but it's still available on the Windows and Apple platform, right? And so that's a way for them to control their services, even though physically it's not something you could buy. But with Apple, they really control their ecosystem, and they could profit the most out of it. And then if you try to get out of the ecosystem, there is a cost involved. Okay, you know, so if you try to move from the Apple ecosystem to like a Windows and especially to Linux ecosystem, and you're heavily invested in all their products and services, like you're on iTunes, you have iCloud, iMessages, all these iProducts, you know, moving is not going to be easy, and that is done by design. It's done on purpose. Okay, once again, these companies are not stupid. They're not only technology companies. So just remember, they are a business first, and then all the other stuff is second and third and fourth. Okay, so you have to look at it that way. And so if you think about it just in general, why did they do this? Why do they have such a tightly walled garden? They're not doing it because they hate open source or they hate competition. Well, they do hate competition, but what they're really trying to do is make sure that you stay in their ecosystem, make sure that you continually use their services and products, make sure you love their brand, and also make sure it's painful for you to move over to any other ecosystem. And that's why they're making so much money, and that's why they're going to continue to make more money. And this is really important to Apple, because if the Apple iPhone, even though the amount that they sold is going down per quarter, but they're still making more money, then their strategy is working. Okay, so let me see if there's other comments. Okay, Guys is saying, in my opinion, being part of an electronic ecosystem is a form of enslavement. Your data is collected and then you use it to condition control you. Yeah, guys, like I said a little bit earlier, it's part of business. You know, if you actually own that company yourself, you would want the same thing. You know, you would want to keep your customers. I mean, because that's what they are. You want to keep your customers and you want to keep your clients, because you as a business owner, you have competition all the time. You know, and especially in the technology space, there's competitors trying to take you down 24 hours a day. And so if there's anything that you could do business-wise to help slow that down, then you're going to do it. Okay, and not everybody agrees with it, but that's why I'm really happy that we still have alternatives, okay, like Linux. Okay, so but for the majority of people, they don't, they kind of feel like that's the only places they could go, and so I understand your point, but at the same time, if you were the one who owned Apple, I think you would do something similar, because you really do want to keep your customers and clients. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. Like, that's why I myself, I don't have any Apple products. It's not that I hate Apple. I don't. There's a lot of things that I love that Apple does. But in terms of just from a user's point of view, okay, and a lot of us who are geeks, who are into technology, the one thing, and I've mentioned this so many times, the one thing that a lot of geeks love, that we value above everything else, is freedom. We absolutely love freedom. We love freedom of choice. We love freedom doing what we want with what we purchase. We love using our services wherever, so that's unfortunately, I think that's the minority. I really don't think the majority of people are like that. I think the majority of mass consumers, they don't care about that stuff, in my opinion. Okay, I mean, in my opinion, for them, what they care more about is whether or not their iPad works with their iPhone and their Apple TV. That's just reality. Whether or not they look cool with their brand new Apple products, and whether or not they could contact their friends on this ecosystem. I think that's more important to a lot of more people than it is the technology stuff. Because if you actually went out, out in the streets and asked people what they love about their Apple iPhones, I would probably say 99%, they're not going to be talking about any technical aspects. They're going to be talking about whether, it looks good, or it's so easy to use, or my sister uses it, or my husband uses it, whatever. They're going to be thinking about more of those things, how it makes them feel, how it fits into their life, and how they think about the brand. And that's why I've said this so many times before, the business end of it, the marketing, the branding, that's the most important thing. The technology stuff, it's not the most important thing. I mean, unfortunately, it's not, because technology gets old. Technology changes every single day, especially if you're thinking about internet services. I mean, I work in the digital space, and it changes every single day. And so, yeah, so that's my thoughts on that one. And so Taha say they use the data to make money too. Yeah, and Taha, I have mentioned this before as well. Data is the most valuable thing for any company. Any company. If you've worked at big companies, well, the data is the most important thing. Because without data, you do not know how much money you're making. Without data, you don't know, you don't know how well your business is doing. Without data, you can't tell who's actually using your products. And so in one case, data is, you can look at it one way, it's like, man, dude, they're taking all my data. But in another case, without data, you won't be able to tell what's working and what's not. I mean, and I think I mentioned this before, even if you think about marketing and advertising, they've been doing this since newspapers. They need to collect data. Like, for example, when they sold newspapers, how do they know if your newspaper, if people are reading your articles? Well, they're buying more newspapers. That's how you know. And then later on, when they were able to track, like, okay, like if I'm putting an ad on a newspaper, how do I know that that ad is making me money? Well, you get more sales, right? And so data is very important. And the company with the best data, they're usually going to be the most successful. Okay, just look at companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. They have a ton of data on you, and guess what? They're making the most money. And so, it's unfortunate that a lot of our personal data is being used more now than ever. But the fact of the matter is, data has been collected ever since the beginning of time, beginning of technology, beginning of everything. Data is necessary. Your computer collects data all the time. And maybe it might not be shared, but if your computer didn't have data, it wouldn't know how your temperatures working in your computer. It wouldn't know your programming. It wouldn't know what routines to run, because it needs data. And so that's another sense of it. And yeah, they do use your data to make money. Absolutely. So the ecosystem, guys are saying the ecosystem is just a marketing tool for decision making. Yeah, it is. I mean, if you do any type of data analysis in the back end, Gaza, like for example, I do digital marketing. Okay, so I do things like Google AdWords, Facebook ads, Amazon ads. So like if you're seeing advertising on your website or smartphones, that's the stuff that's done behind the scenes. And so I could see a lot of that data. And we need that data because, like for example, if we are releasing a new ad for a new product or service, we need to see what people are looking at that. Okay, because it's all about the data that you have and how you target it. And so we're looking at it. Let me give you an example. Say we are releasing a new sale for a product, okay? And we're releasing this on Facebook. So we're doing if you're familiar with digital marketing, you understand what I'm saying. And so say you're doing a dark post for a Facebook ad, right? And you have a creative with the image, you have all the copy and stuff. And then you're targeting, initially is you're targeting a demographic for this product that makes over $100,000 a year. They're primarily female and they're primarily in the United States and the UK, okay? And so you spend all that money to have this marketing program ready for your brand new product. You have a demographic in mind based upon what people bought before because of old data, but now you're going to run it on Facebook because Facebook has extremely powerful targeting. They have so much data on you that you could pretty much target down to how they live. It's pretty amazing. And so now you have all the information, you put the ad out based upon the data you already have, but now you actually have it out there on Facebook as an ad. You could see the reality, what people are actually looking at, whether or not, how many clicks they're clicking on your ad, whether or not you're having conversions, meaning whether or not it leads to a sale or whether it becomes a lead. So that becomes more data, and then Facebook optimizes that data as well, and then you as a digital marketer is optimizing it, and obviously in the end it's going to create more business, okay? And then after you run that ad, you collect all that data. Especially when you run a whole bunch of different ads, you do a lot of what they call multivariate testing or A/B split testing. So you take all that data, you put it into your next set of ads. You see, so that's how it works in the real world. I mean, so whenever you're using the internet, it doesn't matter. The smartphone, it doesn't matter. That's what's happening underneath. We are collecting all that data so we can make better business decisions. Okay, so that's the reality of it. Okay. Samuel asks, hey, what's going on, Samuel? Absolutely agree with you. Collecting data, selling for another ton of money is a part of the business too, yeah. Lance, if there were a Linux Mint phone, I would buy it. I thought the idea of a Ubuntu phone is a great idea, but it failed. Gaza is saying so, 1984. Yeah, it is. But I think, you know, Gaza, this started happening way before 1984. And Lance, yeah, I wish, man, I really wish there was a purely Linux phone. You know, I don't mind. I mean, because I know my data is going to be collected anyway. So, you know, I'm used to that. But if we had like a pure Linux phone, you know, very similar to Linux on our desktops, at least we could have more control over it. You know, when you're using other platforms, you don't really have as much control. You know, even though like for Windows, they give you control for your privacies, you only have the control that they give you. You know, because there is a lot of stuff happening underneath and a lot of it's real technical, so people don't understand how all of this stuff is working. And even if you did, they can make changes at any point. KI2NA, hey, what's going on? Thanks for joining. Was there a memo that was pretty much Linux and then Tizen? Yeah, there was. And Tizen is used by Samsung, and there was also Selfish OS as well. And you remember WebOS? Yeah, I think that was open source, if I remember correctly. And so, yeah, so just getting back to whole Apple earnings, you know, they're making a ton of money, but what's most interesting here is that their iPhone sales have actually gone down, but they're making more money because of the various services that they are selling. Okay, and that is all part of their ecosystem, as Lance mentioned earlier. And so, what can we expect out of Apple in the next few quarters? Well, in my opinion, just like what Facebook is doing, what Amazon is doing, what Microsoft is doing, and Google is doing, Apple is going to become more of a services-based company. Okay, so I predict that you might see, I think it's a possibility, you might see Apple services on other platforms. Like iMessages, you know, I think so, you know, because Tim Cook, I think, unlike what Steve Jobs did, you know, it's still a vertical company, but you're seeing under Tim Cook's direction, it's becoming more horizontal. And so people already love the Apple brand. They really do. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't be this successful. And so if they were to go more horizontal, meaning offering their services across just outside of the Apple ecosystem, I think with the Apple brand, they could probably make more money. And so I think that's where it's going to go in the future. So don't be surprised in the future if the Apple iPhone only accounts for like 20% or less of their sales. Okay? And so moving on to the last piece of news that I wanted to talk about is WannaCry. Okay, you remember this ransomware, WannaCry, in May. It just really disrupted the whole world, actually. It was absolutely horrible. And one of the persons who actually found actual vulnerability with it, basically it was a kill switch. And so it was this person called Marcus Hutchins out of the UK. He was a 22-year-old at the time. I think he's 23 now. But you know, what the WannaCry was doing was, in order for it to activate, it would go out and look for this URL, this domain name. So that would be the switch to turn it on. And then Hutchins found the kill switch for it. He found it out, and then he was able to stop that. And so he did help out a lot of people and potentially destroying other companies and other peoples because they rely on that data. You know, talking about data, once again, how important it is. And so the WannaCry ransomware was effectively stopped or slowed down because of this particular person. But unfortunately, things have turned out for the worse for this person. Just recently, Marcus Hutchins, who was actually visiting Las Vegas for a cybersecurity conference, he was actually arrested by the FBI. And so at first when I read this, I was like, oh, wait, maybe they found out the people who created WannaCry and they arrested him. No, that's not the case. They arrested the WannaCry Hero, as some people has touted him as being. And the reason why they arrested him is because back in 2014 and 15, he was involved in this malware, or they're saying that he was a part of the mastermind of creating this malware called Kronos, which actually stole people's banking data. Okay, and so, you know, instead of being like really, I would say, praised for what he's done, which he was before, and even the security agencies worked closely with him during the whole time of the WannaCry, now he's arrested. Okay, and Hutchins, he actually works for a securities company. He works for, I think it's called Cryptos, and the original Kronos malware was actually on Alphabet, which has been shut down, which is a place that you could, you know, it's like you could sell software, malicious software. And this is a, you know, this is a really, I don't know, it's a really touchy thing, okay? It's really interesting because in a whole technology space, I mean, especially if you yourself work in security, I'm not a securities expert, but it makes it kind of like scary, you know, because in one case, because of the skills and knowledge that you use, of course, if you are doing illegal activities, you know, of course, there should be reprimand for that, especially if you are affecting millions of people, okay? But in this case, it really makes it difficult because what if you are trying to learn how to make things more secure, right? There's white hat ethical hacking, and then there's black hat hacking, and then there's a gray area in the middle. And I think for a lot of people who are learning security, who are actually doing security, there is no black and white. You're usually in the middle. And so in that case, you put yourself at risk. And that sucks because in this case, you might actually want to learn security. Like say, for example, I installed Kali Linux, right? And if you're familiar with Kali Linux, it's a distribution primarily used for penetration testing. And penetration testing means that you are trying to test the security of a particular website, you know, or server or whatever the case might be. And so in this case, you're going to have to learn how to hack into systems. You're going to have to learn what makes systems vulnerable. And so in the future, if there's this gray area, there's this gray area in which a lot of people fall into, and then all of a sudden, agencies like, you know, like the FBI or in many other countries, they're monitoring what you're doing, and then they deem that is illegal. Well, it's gonna really deter people from learning how to, you know, find out vulnerabilities, how to make their systems more secure, you know. And so there's this gray area, you know, and obviously it's still going to go through the courts, but you know, Hutchins, he's from the UK. He could face ending up 40 years in jail in the US, you know, and that's really sucks. I mean, there's no way around that, you know. But obviously, it's got to go through the whole court system to find out whether or not he really was, you know, a part of this. But it sucks because, you know, in this case, the people who are actually doing the damage, okay, the people who are creating this, they rarely get caught, okay. And so I'm not sure if he's being arrested because he was truly involved with this, or they're using him as a scapegoat. You know, I'm not really sure. That's a whole political thing. But if I'm thinking about just from like what I said earlier, people who are doing security, they're normally in the gray area, okay? And so what is Gaza saying? Why wait so long? Why didn't the FBI pass the info onto GCHQ? Gaza saying, or is it because the US think that the UK is so soft on hackers? Asperger's syndrome being claimed again, and then Gaza saying, so it failed extradition warrant again. And then Ty saying the US thinks that everybody is soft on hackers. Ty said the US is just hard on hackers. That's the case. Yeah, you know, Sammy S, this is the right time to bring in a Linux phone, specifically Linux Mint phone. We can have more control over our phone, and at least our OS developer can sell our data. What's your opinion? So let me talk briefly about the security, Samuel, what Gaza and Taha are saying. Because all of this, you know, like for us, we just see what the news is, right? We don't really know what's going on underneath. And I think, in my opinion, a lot of it does have to do with political stuff. You know, it's not really the technical part of it. And so it might be because of that, Gaza, like you were mentioning. This is a perfect time for them to get Hutchins because they don't have to extradite him because he's already in the United States, right? And it's perfect timing. And at the same time, he already helped them with WannaCry a few months ago. And so it's like, well, we already used your help. So now, you know, we can arrest you. I don't know. I'm not sure, but there's a whole lot of political things going on. Because if you remember the WannaCry, it was actually went back to the source was actually North Korea. So I'm not sure of all the details on that. That's what I remember. And so this whole area of cybersecurity, it is a huge, huge area. And not just from a technical point of view. You know, I mentioned this before. This is the next area of wars, okay? Instead of having world wars with physical tanks, planes, armies, cybersecurity is a real thing. And because we depend so much on technology, the effects of it is even more potent than traditional wars, you know, because you can affect everybody. You know, I mean, I mentioned this before, but, you know, like, for example, what if they hacked into very essential things like your power grid and your water supply? You could literally kill millions of people. I mean, that's the reality. And that's more dangerous than sending armies and stuff, you know, because you don't have to physically be there. You don't have to send any of your people to potentially get killed during these wars. And you're spending way less money. And so cybersecurity, it's not only a technology thing. I think it's more of a political thing, just like all the other wars before it. And so if anything, we're going to see more news like this. You know, we're going to see more arrests. We're going to see more control, you know. And I haven't been to the UK, but I have been to Europe. But I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gaza, but I know in the UK, they have a lot of surveillance. There's cameras everywhere. And there's also some restrictions on your data, your internet services as well. If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. And so that's something that's happening all around the world. I think we're going to have more surveillance, more control, but in some cases it might be necessary, okay? Because like just the things that I mentioned earlier, if these other countries or people were able to hack into essential things like your power grid and your water supply, that's going to be really, really bad. You know, and a lot of people are thinking of scenarios where they could hack into nuclear power systems, but I'm more worried about the essentials. Because if you don't have clean water and you don't have electricity, that'll do more damage than stealing data. Okay, and so that's what I'm concerned about. And with this stuff, it's not easy. It's extremely complex. And, you know, once again, it's going to go through the whole court system, but that's, yeah. Anyway, so It's going to become more and more normal, I guess, is what you would say. So that's funny how it's getting to this whole data issue right here. So let me see. Yeah, so Samuel just mentioned earlier, this is the right time that we would have a Linux phone. Yeah, so what I just said earlier, Samuel, is that that's why I wish we had a Linux phone, a purely Linux phone. Because much like our Linux operating systems, right, on our desktops, we do have more control over the type of data being collected. But my feeling is, unfortunately, a lot of our services that we use, it is on the internet. So we are using our internet browsers, and even if we have an application on our desktop, it's connecting with servers online. And so even then, I will say if we had a purely Linux phone, I still think that would be better, as long as it had other services around, so we could control a lot of our data. But in the end, our data is still going to be collected because we are using the internet. We are using services that are connected to the internet. So anytime you do that, your data is going to be collected, like, regardless. And so that's the unfortunate thing. Having a Linux phone will give us more control. But the nature of our environment, our modern world, we're connected all the time. I mean, like right now, I mean, data is being collected on this particular live stream right now, and so it's unavoidable in a lot of ways. But if we have things like our Linux desktop operating system or a purely Linux phone, then at least we have some more measure of control. Okay, so I definitely think it's a plus, and I do hope that some distro or some manufacturer does go forward and produce a purely Linux phone. Because right now, I myself, I don't want to get an Apple iPhone. I just don't. I don't like the walled garden of it. I want more freedom. But at the same time, I'm not really enjoying Android as much as I used to as well. Okay, because they have more and more control, and they are collecting a lot more data as well. And so, I don't know. Hopefully it comes soon. So now, not unless you're a developer, you could create your own. But okay, so KI2A, but then carriers would try to limit again like they did with Android. Yeah, you know, there's always going to be other people controlling it. So you might think you own your phone, but I'm glad you mentioned carriers, KI2A, because the carriers are the ones that provide your service. And so they can limit where you go. They can definitely track what websites you're going to. And so much as what I mentioned with the UK, you know, I mean, they can limit where you go. They can limit the type of communication that you have. That already happens in China, okay, and where there's certain websites that you can't go to. I don't even think YouTube is available in China, if I'm not mistaken. You know, and Google is not a huge presence there because they had this whole battle with Baidu. You know, Baidu is the Google of China. And even Apple recently had to pull some of their VPN services from their app store in China. And so, you know, even if you control your device, you don't control everything else that surrounds it. You know, like your phone would be useless pretty much if you didn't have service, right? And so you have to pay for these services, and they're the ones who control these things, okay? And so they control your data, they control where you go, they can do all of that. And so, like I said, I think going forward, there's going to be more and more control exerted on everything that we have, okay? And so that's unfortunate, but that's where it's heading. You know, that's really where it's heading. Ty says solar power system here in Holland are hackable, so the government is concerned as well. Yeah, Taha, you know, technology, we love technology, right? But since the beginning of technology, there's always been vulnerabilities, and you can't avoid that, okay? But now that we have a more connected world, it's even more of a problem because I'm not saying it's easy, but you're seeing some of these hacks, right? They're done by script kiddies, okay? And these aren't like professional hackers. They just found some scripts online that could easily affect not easily, but for some things, it could easily prey on a vulnerability on a system. Like for example, I did a WordPress website. If you're familiar with WordPress, a lot of your websites run on WordPress, and WordPress is a CMS or a content management system. And I had some of my websites get hacked. And what happened was they actually found a vulnerability with my WordPress website. And I can't remember if it because of the theme that I was using, but what it was able to do, if you know, for WordPress, it has a database that stores all your passwords, right? And then use a script. And I found that script on the internet, so they were able to access this database, okay? And I think WordPress it's definitely PHP. The database underneath it, I don't know if it's MySQL, I can't remember, but it doesn't matter. Because of this script, they were able to get rights to the database, and then they were able to get credentials to log into my actual WordPress website through my admin. And that's one example. And it wasn't some sophisticated thing. It was some scripts that you could find online. And so, you know, like I said, you don't have to be sophisticated. You don't have to be a professional hacker. You know, you could like pretty much find scripts to do that. And there's so many areas where there's no way that you're going to be able to secure everything. It's absolutely impossible. Okay. And so, yeah, Samuel says, yes, it is unfortunate. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. And so, you know, Taha, that's really interesting, you know, for the solar powered systems, or, you know, there's some systems where you could just physically crank it, you know, like I think that one laptop per child. And there's some other laptops that is powered by you just physically cranking it, and that'll produce energy for it. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe in the future as well, maybe for people who are very concerned about their security, maybe they can live completely off the grid. You know, there are a lot of people who already do that. Okay, they're not connected to anything. They'll have their own solar power. They'll have their own way to produce clean water. And, you know, have their own sustainable area. But unfortunately, even with that, in some countries, they limit where you can actually live. Okay, and so, or even like how you can get your water. And so there's still also measure of control there. But I think that is something that it's going to grow more as well, Taha, because I think that for some people who don't want to be in that whole system where there's so much control, maybe that's going to be another area. Okay, where you have a completely sustainable system that's not connected to anything, and at the same time, it's completely independent in terms of the power requirements, the water requirements, the food and sustenance. So I think that would be an awesome thing because that gives people options. Okay, and we might have to go to that point because in some countries there's not enough resources for everyone, and so if you could have more sustainable societies, that would take care of a lot of things, including the whole privacy issue as well, since you're not connected to anything. Okay, and yeah, that really, yeah. So I guess mostly this whole episode, it was primarily, I think, about two things. You know, it was about your data and also your freedoms. Okay, and that's one thing that is always prevalent whenever we think about technology, specifically for people who enjoy Linux. I think that's one thing that we could always agree on, is the whole freedom aspect of it all. Now, those are the three main things that I wanted to talk about. The first thing is no headphone jack, primarily with the upcoming Pixel 2. I talked about Apple's third quarter earnings, which were absolutely bonkers, and talked about the ecosystems and how important that is. And then finally, I talked about, you know, Mark Hutchinson and how he basically helped slow down WannaCry, but now he is arrested. And we spent a lot of time talking about privacy as well. And so with that, this is usually my bonus round. And we could talk about whatever, but we did talk about a lot of different things during this episode. So I'm trying to think of something that I saw was interesting. Oh, and I did see something that was kind of interesting. Speaking of smartphones, I saw the new prototype for the Red smartphone. And so if you're not familiar with the Red smartphone is, Red makes these really expensive cameras. You know, the Red cameras, they're like thousands of dollars. And so what they're doing is they're releasing a high-end smartphone, an Android smartphone that is purely focused on high-end photographers and videographers. And I don't have a picture of it here, but honestly, it's pretty ugly. It's like $1,200. And it's a huge phone. It has a huge camera in the back, obviously. And you can look it up as well. And it's made out of Kevlar, but it's absolutely ugly. I mean, it looked like a looks like an HTC phone back in the day. You know, it's just a square, it's massive, and it also is modular, just like the Motorola phones. You could put more stuff on there, like bigger cameras and stuff, but it's $1,200, and I don't know. It's like, it looks ugly, you know, and so, yeah, which makes me think about something, okay? Motorola, I think, is the really first company. Motorola and LG, at least here in the United States, you know, they started releasing phones that were more modular. And even with Google, you know, they have their Project Ara, which has been discontinued, where we're going to have more modular phones. And I think this would be cool, okay? Maybe not these phones, but in the future, I was hoping that the Google Project Era would become more mainstream at this point. But I hope in the future there are more modular phones that you could just build yourself, which was the whole point of that project to begin with. You know, much like our computers, I just want to pick the pieces that I want, put it together, and then upgrade it when I want to. And so I'm really surprised that that project got stopped. You know, I don't know why. I mean, I can guess why, but let me answer some question here. Red Hydrogen 1. Yeah, Samuel, yeah, that's the one, the Red Hydrogen 1. And I don't know if you've seen it, Samuel, but I think it's a really ugly phone. I think even for like really camera video geeks, I don't even think they're going to buy it. You know, who wants to carry that around? I mean, if you're going to be spending $1,200 anyway, just get a camera, you know. But considering if you're using Red devices, the lens probably costs $2,000 to $3,000 anyway. And so, yeah. But, so, yeah, I'm hoping that the whole modular phones, really, they don't stop that and they come out with truly modular phones. KI2E was saying, I was really hoping for that upgradable functionality phones, but it flopped. Yeah, and here's my thoughts on that KI2E, and I think they stopped the project, in my opinion. I might be wrong on it, because of pressures by manufacturers. Okay, that's my opinion. Why? Well, let's think of it this way. If modular phones were to become popular, right? Hey, Clayton, what's going on? So if modular phones were to become very popular, right, then people would upgrade less. Okay? So, like, right now, you know, we have this, everybody talks about this in the whole tech community when it comes to hardware. They have this planned obsolescence, right? So your phone or computer or laptop, whatever you bought years ago, suddenly it's obsolete now. And you have to buy the new hardware, right? Now, if you had a modular smartphone where you could just take out the screen, say a brand new high-def screen comes out, well, you could just take the screen out, replace it, or, oh, I'm sorry, or if you actually wanted more RAM, just remove the RAM module, put in more RAM, or if there's new features, new cameras, right, just take out the camera module, put in a new camera module. You can imagine, like, these manufacturers, they will make less money, you know, because of the fact that it is modular and you could just upgrade what you want. And so I personally think, that's why the modular project, Google's project, Project Arrow, and many other projects like that, they were stopped because of pressures from manufacturers. Now, maybe these modular phones will still come out, but it would be more niche. Okay, so just think about your computers right now, okay? Computers, specifically PC, it's a huge industry. Especially when it comes to the PC building industry, okay? And there's a lot of money there because of all the different parts. And so I think if they wanted to make modular phones and make it like profitable, make business sense, then I think these manufacturers should follow the PC computing model, okay? So say for example, Samsung, right? Samsung makes a lot of different things. They make a lot of the memory that you buy is made by Samsung. A lot of the screens that you made is made by Samsung, the processors itself. And so it's not just Samsung, LG does as well. And so for example, if you had a more modular world similar to PCs, well, you could make these modular parts. And so that way, you could make money not only off of your devices which are not modular, you could also make money from the modding community. Okay, so I think that's a way that if it is that the companies are worried about these modular phones cannibalizing their sales, then this is the way that they could make money in both ends. and a way that I think consumers, especially tech consumers like ourselves, would geek out over. Okay, so just going back to this, Samuel says $1,200 for just making camera great. I think it is just a gimmick. I don't get this strategy, this particular company. Anyway, it is ugly for sure. Yeah, Samuel. I go back to one thing though with that, Samuel. Very similar to Apple, and I say this all the time. Your branding, your marketing is the most important thing for your company. And so you don't even have to see the product, right? If you automatically think of Apple, right? You already think of certain things right away. That's not by accident. That's by design. So you think of quality, you think of the Apple iTunes, you think of Apple App Store, you think of Steve Jobs, you think of the Mac, you think of so many things before the product even comes out. And the same thing with Red. When you think of Red, you think of high-end cameras, high quality, professionals, even before the product comes out. And so I think people will buy it, but it's going to be people who love that brand. I myself wouldn't buy it because it's absolutely ugly and it's way too expensive for that. Now K.I.Tuni says, Sam, there was an even more expensive one I saw somewhere. Yeah, K.I.Tuni, there's always been like ultra expensive Android phones like the Virtu. And there was another one. There's a black phone, especially the Virtu. It's made out of gold and diamond. It's extremely expensive, but technology was absolutely old. So, and they were like thousands of dollars, $3,000, I think, for a really old Android phone. I mean, technically, that's what it is. Sammy says, yeah, KI, but this one particularly is more expensive for the offering. That's what I think, LOL. Taha is saying, if I think about Apple, I think about sheep. Yeah. Well, Taha, that's like I said, if you're a person who loves that brand, then you're not thinking about that. If you're a person, normally, I would say geeks, normally when they think of Apple, they think of sheep, because sheep don't ask questions, they just follow the herd. And so with Apple, a lot of their mass consumers, and I'm not saying the people who are geeks and stuff, a lot of the mass consumers with the Apple brand is what I said earlier. Once they hear of the brand, they do not care about the tech specs of the product. They don't care. So even if Apple is taking away the headphone jack, which they already have, maybe they'll take away something else. I don't know. So if they continually keep taking away stuff and forcing their Apple devotees to buy more dongles and adapters, they'll still love it because they'll buy it. Just look what they did with the MacBook Pro, and it still sold a lot. And so, if you are not a pure Apple fan because of their branding and marketing, then you'll go ahead and buy it anyway. Hey Shatter, what's going on? How's it going? And so we're on actually the tail end of this episode, and really great discussions today. I didn't really think that it was going to go to this route. So we talked about a lot of things: privacy, data, security, political stuff. Wow, there's a lot of stuff. Tommy Norwood, hi, hey, what's going on, Tommy? And so, so if there wasn't anything else, because normally I try to keep these episodes within an hour. If there wasn't anything else that y'all wanted to talk about, I'm going to go ahead and end this episode. And hopefully next week, cross our fingers, hopefully there's some news about a Linux phone. And so that would be awesome. I'm really hoping that somebody makes a Linux phone. I could do a whole episode devoted on that. And so if there's nothing else, thank you all of you for actually joining this. And let me see. Thomas, I'm trying to get Diablo to run on Linux. Yeah, Diablo. So, but thank you all of you for actually joining, as always, to this live episode. Thanks, Lance. Tommy, sorry, no problem. Thank you so much, Lance, K.I.Tuni, Shatter, Tommy, Gaza M, Samuel, Clayton. Just thank you for all of you who are joining, and even for the people who didn't comment. And as always, if you did get value out of these episodes, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you wanted to support my channel further, you could do that at patreon.com/geekoutdoors. We'll see you on another live episode.